50, 45. There goes Davis. Oh, my God. Davis is going to run it all the way back. Auburn's going to win the football game. Auburn's going to win the football game. He ran the missed field goal.
Okay, guys, you guys have already seen the intro. This is a very special episode because we have our first ever guest on the Ian Fritz Show. Let's welcome in Mason Young at home. Give Mason a round of applause with whoever you're watching with. And let's welcome in Mason Young, plugged in with the OU scene down there in Norman, Oklahoma. Mason, how we doing, man?
Ian, I'm good. It's good to reconnect with you. Some of the stories we've been sharing off screen before recording this, you just seeing what has kind of developed for both of us, since we were in school together and became friends a couple years ago, and honored to be the first guest on the Ian Fritz Show, no doubt.
I couldn't have thought of a better first guest for the show, given how we met, talking about sports every day. And I think this is perfect for the show. And just so you know, since you are a guest on the show, what we do here at the Ian Fritz Show is we give our guests a special mug. So one of these mugs is going to be coming your way. I don't know when it's going to be coming your way, but it's going to be coming your way. So that's just a thank you for coming on the show, taking time out of your day, coming on the Ian Fritz Show. And I really do appreciate you being here and just taking some time to talk OU football with me.
Yeah, man. No, thanks for the mug. I saw you debuted those on one of the more recent episodes, and I was like, man, I gotta ask him about one of these mugs. But
hey, you're getting one. You don't even need to ask anymore. You're getting one.
Yeah. Cool.
And okay, so let's just jump right in. OU football. How are we feeling about Norman, about OU going into SEC football this year? It's their first year in the SEC. How are we feeling? What's the temperature there?
Yeah, I mean, it's really interesting how OU, the difference between how OU feels about themselves versus how the rest of the world is looking at OU, right? And I think, you being the purveyor of college football that you are, you're probably cognizant of this, but like, it's been fascinating to see all the national media really focusing in on Texas and acting like OU's just kind of like along for the ride, like they're almost kind of like that, younger child or whatever. And like,
yeah, yep.
The stats, the head-to-head literally shows us like OU has been more successful than Texas, over the past, since the turn of the century, right? And especially head-to-head as well within like the last 15 or so years. So it's goofy, like, and I've heard other people talk about this too, but like those of us that, whether it's me following OU and writing stuff about OU and covering OU and being around practices and stuff like that, or it's just, the fan that, has season tickets or whatever, like it feels like the national media is like almost insulting our intelligence, like, and like other people too, like people just like people from the SEC schools, they're like always talking about like OU doesn't know like how tough it's going to be in this league. We've got really tough teams. Like, we know that. We've watched SEC football. We've watched, the 6 o'clock window and the 2:30 window, because God forbid that the Big 12 put OU in one of those windows for games, the last like 5 to 7 years.
11 o'clock kicks till you die.
Yeah. And so like we know that like the SEC is the premier conference in college football, and that OU.
Whoa, I'm going to stop you right there, Mason. Not according to Matt Rule, okay? Matt Rule, the Big Ten, that's the NFL of college football.
That's fascinating. That's not a quote I had actually heard, if he did say that.
He said that. I mean, my quote's not verbatim, but he said four automatic qualifiers for the Big Ten. We're the NFL of college football.
Yeah. Thanks to Michigan and Ohio State's dominance, and then adding the new teams from the Pac-12. I mean,
right.
Yeah. Nobody else in the Big Ten has been interesting in a long time, especially not Nebraska. So
Definitely not Nebraska. And I'm not hating on Nebraska. We're not hating on Nebraska. It's just the facts. I would love, and I'm sure the college football scene would love. It's amazing. This is the OU podcast, and we're getting into Nebraska 5 minutes into this thing, which is hilarious. But I would love Nebraska to be good again. That would be great for college football.
I agree, 100%.
And it would probably be good for OU with the history that OU and Nebraska have.
No doubt. No doubt. But, to your original question, it's like, yeah, we know SEC. We literally have watched you play football. We know that these teams are good. We see what Alabama and Georgia have been doing. And so, yeah, there's an understanding that OU is walking into a gauntlet. At the same time, right? In terms of the pulse of OU and how OU is feeling about going into the SEC, or how OU fans should be feeling about going into the SEC. It's a really interesting roster this season, right? Because for the first time in a long time, the defense is actually positioned to be the strength of this team.
Mm-hmm.
You got, Danny Stutzman and Billy Bowman that are, those are day one or day two, second, third round, guys that are going to be taken pretty high in the NFL draft this next year. And then OU went out and added Dominic Williams, the TCU defensive line transfer. That's a guy that I really think he's only expecting to be at OU this year, and then he's going to the league. And so some really good pieces on defense. Obviously, young quarterback, Jackson Arnold. The bowl game was a tale of two Jackson Arnolds, right, at the end of last season.
Kind of a Dr. Jekyll, Mr. Hyde situation.
Yeah, absolutely. The 2 touchdown passes that he threw were pretty incredible. And then at the same time, were just, covering your eyes at the interceptions, right? And so I think there's going to be some growing pains there. And I think that, that's something, especially also with the fact that there's still a lot of mystery shrouding OU's offensive line and what they're going to be after all the turnover from last year. Those are some things that you wonder about, and you wonder if that is maybe going to kind of limit the ceiling. I feel good about the 2 new coordinators coming in. I think.
Okay, and
yeah.
I was going to go here next. And OU, honestly, looking across all of college football, they're one of a handful of teams they're getting a new QB. They're going a new offensive coordinator and new defensive coordinator, and they're in a new conference. They're one of a handful of teams that's all of those changes happening in the same year. So just let's go defense first here. Zach Alley, defensive coordinator hire. How much of that do you think was just Brent Venables saying, "Look, I need to be the head man. I can't fully devote myself to head man and defensive coordinator anymore"? How much of it was, I just need another guy to help me with the defense?
Yeah, I mean, I think that's a big piece of it. Zach Clemson with Brent for a really long time as a student assistant and a graduate assistant, and then as he's gone on in his career, now had the opportunity to be a defensive coordinator at 2 places, ULM and then Jackson State the last couple of years. He's essentially been running Brent's defense, and so the knowledge is absolutely there. He knows that thing to a T, and yeah, there should be Brent's. I don't think BV's ever gonna take his hand completely out of the defense. I think that this is being a great defensive coordinator is what got him here, and so you can expect him to still have a lot of involvement and in the game planning, the ideology, and also the execution of it on a game day. But yeah, I mean it gives you, it definitely with Zach, it should give him another guy that he trusts that can run the defense and give him opportunities to go and look at other things more holistically. And I think some of the best example of it is how they run practice. and opportunities in the spring and some here in fall camp that I've had to get out and watch practice, you know, Zach's running the linebackers. He's doing the position drills with the linebackers, and he's got a couple guys helping him, like James Skalski, who's like his title is like assistant linebackers coach, but he played for Brent and Zach at Clemson.
Mm-hmm.
And then this guy Henry Weinreich.
Good player.
Skalski was real good.
Good player.
And then this guy Henry Weinreich, that's an analyst that Ali brought with him from Jacksonville State. They're running the linebacker drills, and like the last time we were out there, they were doing that on one field, and Brent was like on the other field looking at the quarterbacks and running backs, which you're like, what?
Right. What's Brent doing over here? This is get out of our offense over here, Brent.
Right, and it was like that in the spring too. Like he could float to, like, he could go look at like the safeties in the corners, and he knows that, you know, Zach's doing what needs to be done with the linebackers. Whereas before, there were times where like we'd show up at our practice and it was like Brent, Ted Roof, and Skalski, like all getting after the linebackers. It's like, really need your head coach, your position coach, and your assistant position coach. Your position coach, who also at the time was your, you know, defensive coordinator as well.
Yeah.
All three of these guys here, like, really? And so yeah, I mean, I think definitely will help, and that I think that puts a perfect cap on your first question. Is like, I think that like by better managing the defense, and also just like the personnel that they have, like with all the guys I mentioned coming back, like I think that this OU team feels like that they can surprise some people, you know, nationally and in their SEC constituents, because of, you know, how good they expect their defense to be, and also just like we were talking about all the doubt that people have, all the people throwing shade and being like, yeah, it's Texas and then OU.
Mm-hmm.
They can, you know, use that as motivation. Like I think I don't think this is honestly the first time that's happened. Like I think a lot of people just like, you know, they question OU no matter what era they've been in, and OU kind of likes to like at least tell itself it's the underdog, I guess, and try to use that to its advantage.
That makes sense. Now, if it was me, I don't know if I'd want to be the underdog, but it's not me. It's a whole program. But you kind of mentioned it there a few minutes ago. Danny Stutzman, Billy Bowman, even a guy like Woody Washington, all coming back to this defense for a third year with Brent Venables. How much do you think that is going to help this defense year one in the SEC? Obviously, it's going to help getting 3 veteran guys back, but not just 3 veteran guys, but 2 guys that are preseason All-American type players in Billy Bowman and Danny Stutzman. How much does that help this defense with a bunch of young talent? If you look at how Brent Venables has recruited the last 3 years defensively, leading those guys and even building to a 4th year next year.
Yeah, invaluable, right? I mean, I think the best example of that might be the safety room. They don't have a ton of depth at safety. Like there's a really good, you know, rotation of 3 with Billy, with Robert Spears Jennings, and with Peyton Bowen. But then after that, it's the 3 freshmen. It's Jaden Hardy, Mike Boganowski, and Reggie Powers. But in a couple years, right, imagine how good those 3 freshmen are going to be after, you know, watching and learning from a guy like a Billy Bowman, right? Like the experience and insight that he's going to be able to, you know, give those guys in their first years of college football, in theory, would be invaluable. And I think it, you know, it's probably the same thing with Stutzman. Like, and there might actually be more of an immediate, well, I mean, there is an immediate translation with Billy, because like he's helped RSJ and Peyton. They're, you know, still a little bit younger than him, and like he's helped them get better. But it should really come into play with Danny, because you got all these guys that like Kip Lewis and Lewis Carter and, you know, whoever. Kobe McKenzie's, you know, and Kip are a little bit, you know, older now. They've got some experience under their belt, but like a Lewis Carter or someone like that's still pretty young, or like a James Nesta. He was like the only linebacker in the recruit class this year. Like Danny, the crazy thing about Danny, right, is like he literally hunkered down and studied the playbook so well and got all the reps, and he can play the mic or the will, and is equally good at both. And so like the flexibility that gives you in terms of like moving him to different spots on the field and also playing different combinations of other guys with him to, keep other guys fresh, playing their best. That's huge because like you can have like him and Kip Lewis on the field at the same time, and Danny's at the mic and Kip's at the will, and you got Danny plugging up the middle, fitting a run gap. And then the next play, it's like third down, you bring on Lewis Carter to play the mic and cover the middle. You put Danny at will and you let him blitz. And they even, they sometimes like go to like a bear look where, they bring him up on the line of scrimmage and blitz him. And he's great at that too. That's how he got that. I'm pretty sure they were doing that when he got that strip sack to kind of finish the game against BYU last season on the road. So yeah, I mean, like it's incredible not only to have those guys like mentoring your younger players, but with Danny in particular, it creates a really intriguing flexibility in terms of what you can show the opposing offense.
And speaking of Danny, I believe, and this kind of segues into what we're going to talk about next, I believe Danny was the second leading sack getter for Oklahoma last year with 3.5 sacks. And just a PSA, you never really want a linebacker to be in the top 3 of sacks on your team. Now, it depends on how many he gets. I guess if he's getting 9 sacks, then you're like fine with it. But 3.5, you're not really wanting him to be in your top 3. So transitioning to the defensive line, you mentioned Demonic Williams, the TCU transfer earlier. What's going on the defensive line? Is there anyone, Demonic Williams included, that can get after the quarterback and be a real game changer for Oklahoma this year? Because the SEC, everyone talks about it, and I'm sure you're hearing it. I'm sure you heard it a lot at SEC media days. The trenches. It's all about the trenches in the SEC. Everybody hears it every year. The trenches there's nothing like the trenches in the SEC. The big boys up front, nothing like it. Can OU hang on the defensive line?
Yeah, it's gonna be fun to find out, right? Like, I feel like the Dominic Williams acquisition was huge. I feel like he was like kind of the missing piece of like, okay, they needed another like ferocious defensive tackle. I'm interested to see what they do with the front because the Venables defense is really pretty multiple. From what I understand, Allie actually ran more 3-man. Brent's run more 4-man in his time at OU, but Allie, at ULM and Jackson State, he ran more 3-man front. Was kind of his thing, and obviously they showed that in the bowl game against Arizona. And Brent's whole like rationale for that after the game was like, yeah, I mean, they just like their skill guys were so good that like we felt like we had to have another DB out there to be able to cover. So be interesting to see if that like feeling of things translates to the SEC. It's definitely probably based on like matchup. But Dominic Williams also comes from a system at TCU where they played a lot of 3-man and he was kind of like the hole plugger in the middle. And so he didn't have a ton of sacks because he was just shutting up the run. So I'll be interested to see how they do that. I don't know if this is like a good idea from like a football perspective. I have absolutely no idea if this would make sense personnel wise, but like
then that's a great thing to to throw on the Ian Frisch show. If you have no idea if it's a good idea or not, that's exactly where we put everything.
Right? Yeah. I'm glad that I hit that qualifier within the first 20 minutes of the show or whatever. But my point is, like, what if you ran a 4-man front and put Dominic Williams and DJ Terry in the middle, and they're both over like 300 pounds? What is the opposing offensive line supposed to do with that?
Hard to move short, big dudes, right?
Impossible. Yeah. So I don't know if they'll show that look, or if those guys are like both nose guards and they're like, yeah, you guys are not playing at the same time. That's something that I've been wondering about. So I think what you're seeing around the SEC, right, is there's actually like a lot of premium edge rushers right now, like James Pierce, Tennessee, the Uman Malin guy that went from like Florida to Ole Miss or whatever. And there's probably some other guys I'm forgetting. But I kind of wonder if they might play more 3-man and like have the tackles plugging gaps rather than trying to penetrate, stunting, doing some other stuff like that, and trying to penetrate so much. Because like DJ Terry had some opportunities last year and he didn't get a ton of sacks either,
Yeah.
I think if you have a defensive tackle that's like like have a high pass rush win rate, it's probably like either Grayson Halton or Devon Sears. They showed that in the spring game. They had some, and yeah, I mean, shoot, it's a scrimmage. There's sacks. It's like, okay, you got behind the offensive line. Congrats.
Right. Yeah. Okay. We'll give it to you.
Based on where you're standing, we think you're gonna hit the quarterback.
Right. Yeah.
But I think there has actually been a lot of optimism about the way those guys have improved since last season and what they've done in fall camp, and that they could be the guys on the interior that generate a lot of pressure, right? Whereas, Dominic Williams is just gonna like blow up everything. He's gonna, he might get some pressure every once in a while, but he's also just gonna like stop anybody from running the ball on you. So that's where the edge rushers. But that's where the edge rushers come in. Like, I think Ethan Downs could have a really good year this year, and he has to. That's what he talked about. Like, he was somebody that could have gone to the draft, and he was like, I have to come back and improve. And he was actually the sacks leader last year. So, I think he's someone who's poised for a really good year, be able to get after the quarterbacks. There's a lot of hype about R. Mason Thomas and PJ Adebawore, right? Like, those guys physically, right, are freaks. But, PJ, they eased him in last year because he was just a freshman. What does the mental side of things look like in year 2? And in R. Mason, it's just dude's always been hurt. So if he can finally stay healthy, then, he's somebody who's twitchy that can really get after people. Be curious to see what they get out of Trace Ford this year. Like, he didn't quite have as much of an impact last year as I thought he would. I think just, all the injuries have, maybe kind of stacked up for him. But they said in spring ball, like, he's healthy and it's looking good. So that's someone to watch. I think people are sleeping on Caden Woolard. The dude had like 9.5 sacks in Miami, Ohio last year. And everybody, the immediate reaction is like, oh, well, he played in MAC. How's
Miami of Ohio, right?
How's that going to translate? It's like, okay, he still had to be a pretty good, defensive end to be a starter and get that many sacks at a D1 school, period. So I think he's someone people are sleeping on. And then the guy that there's like a lot of buzz right now is Daniel Okoye, because dude's just a freak. I mean, he looks the part, especially for, a freshman. So can he carve out a role? So like, all that to say, I just went down this list and named all these guys. When was the last time you could do that about an OU defensive line and be like, yeah, I think they're like, and that's not even to mention Jaden Jackson and David Stone. Jaden Jackson might in the middle, like Jaden Jackson might start some games this year. David Stone, you don't know what you're going to get as a freshman, but he's going to be a star someday. He was not a 5-star recruit, for no reason.
For nothing. Yeah.
Yeah. So like, when was the last time you like looked at yourself and were like, yeah, I think they're 6 deep at defensive tackle and defensive end.
And
that it just hasn't been. The OU has just been so like lousy for quality personnel for probably
10, 12 years,
8 years now. Yeah.
And that's got to be different for fans to, and not that the offense is going to be bad, but we'll get into some of the offense here in a second. But just a complete 180. We are really good on defense, and we have all these guys, kind of like we've had on offense for the past really forever. I don't really know what's going to happen with all these guys, but at least we have them, right? Just there's a positivity with the defense, which is crazy for OU.
Yeah.
And positivity so much to show that there's national recognition for how good they could possibly be.
Right. I mean, I'm trying to even think like when the last you had some guys here and there during the Lincoln Riley era, right? Like Perion Winfrey and like Nick Benito and like Isaiah Thomas. Those guys had like really good Ronnie Perkins, like they had some good years back in like 2020, 2021 time frame, but like there was absolutely no depth behind them. When those guys came off the field, it was like, what are they gonna do? And I honestly remember that being like a griping point at some points with like Grinch calling the defense was you look out there. I mean, like I think I remember this like one series against Kansas. That like Kansas game in 2021 was so disgusting. Like I can't believe. Yeah, that's like one of the wildest games I've ever covered because you had the like power outage or whatever, and you had Caleb Williams, the play where he like stole the ball,
taking it from Kennedy Brooks.
Yeah, and then having to figure out like,
can he do that?
Is that even legal? Yeah, wild game. But like there was like I remember there was like a crucial third down in that game where like they had like Downs, who was like a freshman at that point, wasn't very good yet, and like Josh Ellison and some other like random guy on the field. It's like it is like a do or die third down. How are Perion Winfrey, Isaiah Thomas, and Nick Benito, none of them are on the field right now? Like, what is going on here? And so, yeah, I mean, like, that's, yeah, just, it seems like there's, like, quality depth just about everywhere on the defense. Now, I mean, right, like, once they start playing these SEC teams, it's like, okay, do these guys end up actually doing anything? They end up actually being any good, do they become Reggie Grimes where he blows up all the non-conference opponents and then just disappears the rest of the 2022 season? Well, I don't know.
You don't want the disappearing man on your football team. Not a good thing to have.
Yeah.
Okay, so let's transition. I think we've exhausted the defense. We've named 35 guys that are going to be superstars for OU this year. So let's go mention some guys on the offense that hopefully for OU fans out there can either be really, really good or good enough to let the defense keep them in a lot of games. But first, mentioned it earlier, new offensive coordinator as Jeff Lebby. Jeff Lebby went and took the Mississippi State head coaching job, which we'll see how that goes. Mississippi State, not a lot of guys left on their team from last year, so might be a tough year for Jeff Lebby in year one. But Seth Littrell and Joe John Finley, co-offensive coordinators, kind of odd, but the way I understand it, and you can probably enlighten me on this a little more, Seth Littrell is going to be kind of the head guy there and going to be calling the plays.
Yeah, Seth's calling the plays for sure. Joe John has for the past few years, even with Lebby, and will continue. I would expect Seth's going to be in the box and Joe John is going to be on the field doing the signals. And usually there's like some like GA that's helping, probably like one of like the like assistant quarterback coaches or something is like helping out with the signals. Tanner Schaefer did it until he went with Lebby to Mississippi State. And yeah, I mean, like really what Joe John's role amounts to is just ideology shaping, like him and Seth playing out the games together and stuff.
Mm-hmm.
And Seth actually calls the plays. And yeah, it's interesting in terms of like I still have some questions about what they're gonna be, like what they're gonna look like, right?
Yeah.
So like to the point of like we just mentioned, like Brent's like defensive fronts are multiple. He's run more forward OU. Zach's run more 3-man when he's been the coordinator. So Luttrell's, offense at where he's been has been this like air raid type deal that comes with Leach, comes from Mummy, and that he had when he was at like Texas Tech and Arizona and North Carolina and Indiana and some of these places that he was before, he eventually became the head coach at North Texas. And even at North Texas, because they had Mason Fine, who's like from some tiny town in Oklahoma that like just threw the ball all over the place. He was North Texas's quarterback. And then Joe John is like he like was around the Briles family, Texas high school football, and then was at Baylor for some time and has been with Lebby a lot throughout their careers together. Was with Lebby at Ole Miss, and then Joe John came to Oklahoma, and then Lebby ended up following. And they're more like spread, and I think OU fans are like to the point where they're like, man, I hate Lebby's offense. And it's not. I don't think it's so much the concepts of like what they were actually trying to do, as much as wow, hey, did you know that I can see you now? I haven't been able to see you like this whole time.
So just for the viewers, sorry to interrupt you there, Mason.
You're good.
I had a second camera going, and Mason was just talking to a blank screen this whole time. He couldn't actually see me, so I had a separate camera, and that one died. So now I'm on my computer camera, and you can see me, and I'm in the Sahara Desert apparently with a bunch of elephants. So sorry to interrupt, Mason, but at least you can see me now. Did we lose you? Did we lose Mason?
I apologize, but everybody's having a nice look at my kitchen. So
yes,
anyway.
I mean there would be a green screen behind me is what was here before, so not a great scene either.
Nice. Well, anyway, back to ball. Yeah, so like I don't think it's so much that like the spread doesn't work because like Baylor used to destroy like back in like the mid 2000s, those Baylor teams that were running spread used to rip OU's defense to shreds. But like it's the timeliness of things that people hated with Lebby, right?
Mm-hmm.
They would like it's the running the ball up the middle with a wide receiver on third down against Kansas or whatever. Stuff like that.
You're telling me that wouldn't work, Mason?
I mean, buddy, we saw it. It did. Like I'm just
that's shocking, right?
Yeah, stuff like that. And so I keep hearing that, like, even though for all of Seth Luttrell's like air raid tendencies, right? People keep saying he's not going to be afraid to run the ball. Like, and OU has a good stable running backs, and with especially with Sawchuk and Barnes being kind of the 1-2 punch, and we'll see how Taylor Tatum factors in. I think he could. I think he's really talented, having been the number one running back in the 2024 class. But seeing how those offenses, like how like Seth and Jojon mesh their ideologies is going to be really interesting. And then how does Seth handle? Does he handle the like timeliness deal better than Levy? Like, does he have the right personnel on the field at the right times? Does he, have a good feel for what he's doing in the like third down situations? And also the use of tempo, right? Like that was a big like fans like big gripe with Levy too, right? It was like the defense gets a stop, the offense finds a way to go 3 and out in like less than 30 seconds, and the defense is right back on the field after they even haven't even had time to get a drink of water. So I think that's like one of the biggest adjustments they got to make is just like the cadence of things. I don't think they're gonna huddle much. I mean, like
Tempo town.
yeah, the huddling is like almost dead in college football, except
Rarity.
for like in the Big Ten, like Michigan.
Yeah.
Like
Yeah.
and I mean, like some people would be like, hey, let's just build the best offensive line possible and just go to Michigan and we're just gonna like run it down everybody's throats. But that offense is like not sexy. Like fans who are saying they want that don't actually want that.
Yeah, they would be a little bored when they go to a game and OU would go on a 11-minute 15 play drive and end with a field goal. They'd be a little disappointed, I think, with the offenses they've had.
Yeah, you want to see the ball thrown all over the place. But you've gotta not put this defense has the depth, but you still have not got to put them in adverse positions where they have no chance because they're coming back on the field for a second time after they were already out there, less than a minute ago.
Mm-hmm.
That's the big thing for me.
Yeah, and I'm sure the defense would love it if the offense was able to sustain some drives, especially after the defense comes up with a big stop. If I was a defensive player, that would be maybe the greatest thing of all time. Hey, we just had a great drive for us, and now we're going back out there 25 seconds later. Wouldn't be very fun if it was me, and I don't even play football. But let's jump into some players on the offensive side of the ball. I think let's start with Jackson Arnold, 5-star freshman a couple years ago. Now he's not a freshman. The turnovers were an issue against Arizona in the bowl game. How much of that was just it's his first game playing? He's a freshman. He's going to make a lot of mistakes. And I'm sure he'll make mistakes in the SEC, his first year in the SEC as a young quarterback still. He's not some old head anymore, or yet. He's not there yet. He's only 20 years old still. So how much of the turnovers you think were just he was kind of thrown out there, Dillon Gabriel left, go to Oregon, and Arizona was a solid team last year? Or was it just Jackson just trying to make plays and show off what he can do?
Yeah, I think it's a balance of both, right? I mean, dude's only got probably 2 weeks to prepare when he finds out he's going to start that game, and has really not, to that point, not had any reps since BYU, so it's kind of just sat, for a couple games. So that's one thing. You got a patchwork offensive line because Guyton and Rain both opted out. So a lot of new guys that didn't play together that much during the season. So those things are definitely pieces of it. And at the same time, there is some fault for Jackson Arnold, and I think he would acknowledge that. He's got to be more decisive. But he's been working on that all offseason. That's been like a whole thing. And that's the big, the sense that I get about him is that he is just absolutely relentless. He has not quit since that game, has not quit working and trying to improve. And it's almost eerie how similarly his college career is playing out to his high school career. Because if you go back and look at his high school career, his freshman year, they were playing in the state championship game, and their starter got hurt. He had to come in, and he had barely played all season. That went worse than the bowl game. He was like 2 for 11 for like 9 yards or something.
Tough.
Yeah, and threw, I think, at least one interception, maybe more. So like, and then it went on to become something really special. He had really great junior and senior years at Denton Guyer, and then he ended up being the National Gatorade Player of the Year as a senior, and was considered one of the best quarterback prospects in the country. So I think, like I said before, there's probably going to be some growing pains. There's a chance he'll throw double-digit interceptions this year. But, 40 touchdowns, 45 touchdowns, 50 touchdowns, and 10 interceptions. You'll take it.
This just in, Mason Young predicting 50 touchdowns for Jackson Arnold. I'm writing it down. We've got it in the books now. Do you want to? Is that 50 touchdowns, Mason? I mean, that's Heisman numbers.
Well, all I'm saying, I'm not putting down a firm bet. I mean, because that would be pretty ludicrous. But all I'm saying is, like, I just think he may throw a lot of interceptions, but it's gonna kind of be like Rattler. Like, Rattler in 2020, his first year in the starter, like what he ends up becoming in the long run of the season and projecting, and then not saying he's going to turn into Rattler, because like we all know what happened there.
Sooners fans better close their ears here for what Mason's saying right now.
But like, right, Rattler like had a really rough start, and then he finished that season really, really well, and it projected well for the future. I think that's kind of probably along the lines of what you're going to get with Jackson Arnold, is just the positives and the growth toward the future this season is going to so, in the end, out magnify any mistakes he makes.
Mm-hmm. That makes sense. Okay, so we've talked Jackson Arnold. The big boys up front. There's a lot of buzz nationally. That's the biggest question for OU going into the season. How big of a question is it? Is it really the biggest question for Oklahoma? And will Bill Bedenbaugh, offensive line coach there, will he just get it figured out?
Yes, it is a huge question.
Okay.
I genuinely don't know what they're going to do. Because now there's like people out here reporting that guys are like getting banged up in the scrimmages, and you don't know like what's gonna, who's gonna be available come week 1. It's a mess. It is a mess, because none of the transfers they got, I feel like, at least on paper, are like generationally talented, right? They were kind of like the guys that you could get, and not the A-list guys that were available in the portal. And you also have, nobody really coming back. Like, Walter Rouse, Andrew Rain, Acade Matoyer, Tyler Guyton, they're all gone. They went pro. Caden Green and Savion Byrd hopped in the portal. They're gone. So, like, you got Jacob Sexton, Troy Everett, who's working back from a knee injury that he had in spring. Those guys have started a combined 8 games for each. And that's it. Nobody now, I mean, there's, Michael Tarquin coming from USC, Spencer Brown, Michigan State, Garen Hatchett from Washington, and then Tabechi Wiwu from North Texas, which, quick aside on him, I think he's undoubtedly the best lineman that they got. I think if that's the one, that's probably the one spot that's locked up, is he's playing one of the guard spots, no doubt. He's like a future NFL offensive line. Okay. That was an absolute steal, getting that guy out of North Texas. He seems like a freak. But So you've got these guys that have starting experience at other schools, but they haven't played a game together. So it's definitely concerning. It is like honestly really concerning. But you know, it, part of you is like, okay, just trust in Bill Bedenbaugh. He has the pedigree. He sends all these linemen to the NFL. We know like generally year to year, it takes, sometimes they don't figure it out until like week 5 or week 6. They just don't. And there's some drives in the games before that, like where you're like, what the heck? Because I remember last year where I think it was an SMU game. Savion Byrd just got absolutely eaten alive by a SMU defensive lineman, and Dylan Gabriel got sacked on like 3rd down and they punted. And it was like, okay, they still don't have this thing figured out, and they probably won't for a couple weeks. And that's just how Bill rolls. So I think where people should really, really start to get concerned is if like you're in like you're going into like your like 4th game in conference play, or maybe even like your like 3rd game in conference play, and they've given up like 10 plus sacks the past 2 weeks, and yeah, like it could be real boom, it could be real boom or bust.
Like, I would think people in Norman wouldn't be too happy if they're 3 games in conference play and they're giving up 10 plus sacks.
Yeah, I mean, not like per game, but like
combined. Right. No, yes.
Yeah.
That if they're giving up 10 plus sacks per game, Norman might be burnt to the ground by then, Mason.
Yes. Yeah. But just to be clear, in case anybody was thinking I was saying 10 sacks per game, I think they're gonna be able to run the ball all right. Feel pretty good about that. I just kind of wonder about pass pro and what that's going to look like, especially like, and I think we'll know pretty quickly, because I talked about James Pierce Jr. earlier, the edge guy for Tennessee. Tennessee's got, one of the best defensive lines in the SEC, probably.
A lot of people are saying the best in the country.
Yeah. And so that first game of conference play, you're going to, throw everybody out there and get tested, and it's probably going to be pretty telling one way or the other. So in conclusion, I'm pretty concerned about it, but I also genuinely don't know. And Bill Bedenbaugh always knows better than anybody who's trying to speculate about it. So we'll just see what happens.
So PSA, any OU fans that came to watch this hoping to feel good about the offensive line, because nobody else feels good about the offensive line, I would still feel uneasy, OU fans. And, maybe it's just in Bill Bedenbaugh you trust, and that seemed to have worked forever. So maybe he'll do it again. I don't know. But let's get into some wide receivers here for OU. And FYI, anybody out there that doesn't know, they had one of their wide receivers go down this past week, Jaden Gibson, out for the year. But I think, and Mason, you know more about this than I do, the depth at wide receiver seems to be in a pretty good spot. Talk about some of those guys that you think are going to be maybe breakout stars in the SEC, but maybe just a breakout star for OU this year.
I think the 3 deep at wide receiver for OU, which includes some freshmen, is better than what some mid-majors have starting. I honestly believe that. Like, shoot, man, it might be the best wide receiver room in the country. And I mean, just go down the list, right? Deion Burks. We watched that spring game. Guy's fast as all get out. Just absolutely takes the top off the defense twice. Could have done it a 3rd time. Jackson Arnold didn't overthrow him by like an inch. He's going to be good. And they're going to find a lot of ways to get him the ball. He plays the slot, but you can move him outside. And I've kind of even wondered about they've got a bunch of other guys that are freaky fast too. And like let's just take Brennan Thompson, for example. Put Brennan Thompson in the slot, put Deion Burks outside, or vice versa, and ask a SEC defense to defend those two guys on the same half of the field. You're not going to be able to cover. You're not.
Brennan Thompson has like elite track speed.
Yes.
Like that's how fast that guy is.
Yeah.
Yeah.
They're yeah. And so, and then you got, Jalil Farouk is just, good receiver, leader of the room, leader of men, a good player that, they're gonna kind of a gadgety guy. They're gonna do some different things with him. I think they could give Burks some sweeps as well. But Farouk's gonna be, your like security blanket on third down. We saw that in the BYU game. Jackson checked into that slant and hit Farouk over the middle for that, key third down conversion to ice the game. So he's like the veteran guy that you can trust when it's all on the line. Then you got Nick Anderson, right? I mean, enormous and fast. He's the total package. Dude's a freak. I think he's going to be really tough to cover for any corner in the SEC because he's 6'4" and he's also stupid fast. And would you have loved to have had Jaden Gibson and Nick Anderson on the outside and then Deion Burks in the slot and all the different matchup issues that would create? Yeah, you would. And it's unfortunate that you're not going to have that because of Gibson's season-ending injury. But another guy that you could maybe do it with is Ivan Carrion, the freshman. He's 6'7", man. It is.
So he's pretty short.
Yeah, I mean, honestly, bro, grow up, man. Eat your vegetables. He is enormous. And so, yeah, I mean, if you had him on the outside on one side and Nick Anderson on the other, what are they going to be able to do about that? I don't know. And then as we get into, deeper into the room, Jaquez Petaway, Zion Kearney, Zion Raggins, KJ Daniels. It's a bunch of Brennan Thompson clones. They're all 5'9" guys with track speed. They're all the same player. And we'll see, which are the ones that rise to the top as probably that backup slot guy for Burks. And some of them could play outside too, I suppose. But, you're going to have a pretty good outer, Farouk and Anderson are going to be the starters on the outside, probably. And them and Burks, are going to command a lot of snaps. But there's a lot of guys there that just, are going to be able to, in theory, take the top off the defense. The guy that's getting a lot of buzz right now is JJ Hester. He transferred from Missouri for the 2022 season as they were kind of trying to restock the wide receiver room, first year under Brent. He really hasn't played hardly at all the last 2 years. It's 70 some odd snaps. I looked it up the other day. Because he broke his foot twice, apparently, is what Brent said. So
that'll keep you out of some games.
It will. It is tough to play with a broken foot, I would imagine. So he's this guy that there's all this buzz about. All of a sudden, great special teams player, apparently. Supposedly he's had a really good camp. BB says he's going to have some sort of role. I don't know what that looks like. I don't know if he's a slot guy. I don't even know if he's, slot guy versus outside guy. I honestly have no idea because the dude's never been on the field. But we'll see if that materializes into anything. And then obviously you got Andrew Anthony back, right? Still working back from that knee injury. Was the leading receiver last year before he tore his ACL against Texas. I don't think he's going to be ready to go right away. And I don't think that they're going to rush him back just in the wake of Gibson's injury because that wouldn't be good for him. But I think you can maybe see him back by like Tennessee or Auburn. And it's a bit of a mystery, right? You hope that the speed that he showed last year, all comes back and that he's, the same or better than he was before the injury. I guess we'll find out. But he's another guy that on paper gives you some flexibility. He can play the slot or he can play outside. And you think, based on what we've seen in the past, that he's going to be a burner.
Yeah. Yeah. So, I mean, for OU, sounds like defense, very good. We're happy here. Offensive line, questions, but in Bill we trust. Receivers, you just pick a couple guys out of there and you should be good. Jackson Arnold, talent, ready to roll. And you touched on the running backs earlier with Gavin Sawchuk and Javante Barnes. Now, we're coming up on an hour here, so I don't want to take too much more of your time. So we'll touch on the schedule here. And look, it's a doozy for OU's first season in the SEC. I think we can both agree on that. The over-under 7.5. And OU fans out there probably hate me for what I said OU was going to go this year. And again, I didn't say they were going 7-5 because I think they stink. This is strictly schedule based. I think they lose a lot of close games. But 7-5 is not absurd with their over-under being 7.5. Just for OU fans out there that hate me now. Give me one or two games on here that you think OU, national media, no chance they win that game. And you think they could actually, hey, sneaky game on the schedule. What do you got?
That's a really good question. I don't know that this would be the flashy answer or the answer you're really looking for, but I got to give time for the other answers to kind of marinate. The easy one is Auburn, because there's been this whole, like, ever since SEC Media Days, like, Kirby Smart said Auburn's the toughest place to play on the planet. And Jackson Arnold actually said that Carson Beck, the Georgia quarterback, told him that the Jordan-Hare Stadium is cursed, which is interesting because I would highly doubt that Georgia's even come close to losing there in the last, handful of years.
Last year. It was close.
You're right. It was. And so was Alabama.
Yep.
But I don't know. Auburn's either going to be not much better than they were last year, or they're going to be like really good and really surprise everybody. I don't know if there's much of an in between. And everybody's like, oh, it's OU's first road game. They'll be freaked out. They won't know what to do with this environment. It's like, really?
OU's gone places. I mean, they've gone and played at Neyland Stadium before, and they went in there and won.
Yeah.
Right? Now, could be a little different with a sophomore quarterback from Jackson Arnold going. That is where, if I was an OU guy, that's where I would be concerned. Look, he's a very young guy, and his first road trip is Jordan-Hare Stadium. That's where I would be a little concerned.
So with that being said, like, I'm pretty 50-50 on that game. I'm really not even sure how I feel about that game. Ole Miss and LSU are kind of the two that stick out for me as, like, and I guess maybe Missouri kind of falls in this space as well. Like, they're just like, yeah, it seems like that people really aren't giving OU much of a chance to win those games. And it's like, do we really think that these teams are like that much better? I don't really even know that Texas's roster is like that much significantly better than OU's. Like, I kind of think like the only, I almost wonder if it's like Georgia and everyone else. If like Georgia's roster is just that much better than everybody else's in the SEC, and then there's not that much separation between the rest of the group, you can probably bring Alabama a little bit closer to Georgia, but it's solely based on the talent on paper. I am kind of wondering what that'll look like, if there will be any like
fall off.
An adjustment period, going from Saban to Kalen DeBoer. That will be interesting to monitor. But and I don't know, maybe you make the case for Ole Miss because of all the spending they did in the portal. But I just got to see it to believe it. Ole Miss is testing the NBA, MLB super team theory, essentially.
Yeah.
They pushed all the chips in to free agency.
It's this year or
yeah,
nothing really.
Yeah. So are they going to be the Golden State Warriors or are they going to be the New York Mets? I have no idea until I actually see it.
Right.
So that's definitely a game. LSU, how good are they going to be? I think Nussmeier, he's waited a long time for this opportunity to be the starting quarterback. Maybe he surprised some people. He was really good. He won me a national championship in my EA College Football Dynasty. So I'm slightly partial to him. We also have to face the facts that they lost the Heisman winner at quarterback.
Small loss.
And also their top 2 receivers both went to the NFL.
Again, small loss.
And they have a new defensive coordinator because their defense last year was horrendous, and that's why they weren't there. They lost 3-4 games, whatever it was. They weren't ascendant. They were a good team, not a great team.
Yeah.
So got some questions about them. And then Missouri, I think the hype is probably just overstated. I really think so. They lost their defense coordinator. They lost a lot off of last year's defense with Rakestraw and whoever those guys were in the secondary that were good players for them.
Just had a transfer defensive lineman go down as well for the season.
Right. And the Brady Cook Luther Burden connection, fun to watch. Has some Heisman potential, but Heisman, Biletnikoff, either or. But I just have no idea if their defense is going to be any good. And I feel like last year might have been their year, and then there might actually be some regression this year. So those 3 games, are being predominantly, plus Auburn seems like being predominantly picked against them. I guess the big one's Alabama, right?
That is a question.
Yeah. I don't
Got
know.
him at home?
I don't think it's the timeline is bad. It's so late in the season that it literally may not be consequential to the CFP race or the conference championship race, all those other games.
Yeah.
It may be 2 teams that are already out of the standings that have nothing to play for. Or it could be that Alabama, OU's down in the bottom and Alabama's up at the top and pretty secure in where they're at. So, and then obviously nobody's picking OU to beat Texas, but that's a dead horse. That's a dead horse at this point. We've
just chalked that one up to a loss already. So OU 0-1 against Texas. What do you have OU finishing this season? If you have one, if not, now's the time to pick one right here on the Ian Fritz Show. And I guess we'll know if you think they're going to the college football playoff with your record prediction or not.
Bold prediction. Man, I think they're going to be probably 8-5 when you include the bowl game.
Include the bowl game? Okay.
Yeah.
8-5. Look, I mean,
there's a lot of matter coming out now about them losing one in non-conference.
That would hurt.
They might lose to Tulane.
That would hurt. That would hurt. That would hurt. I don't think anybody who's coming up, even probably the odds makers aren't chalking OU up with a loss in the non-con. So one last thing before we get out of here, and by get out of here I mean like stop record and you'll still be in the Skype. And yeah, I said Skype because this is a Skype and not a Zoom. We just do things different here at the Ian Fritz Show. One last thing. Give me non-OU related. Give me one thing, college football related though, or maybe not. Just a bold take. A bold take. So you're going out on the edge of a cliff here. That's how far I want you for 2024 season.
Sure. I'll keep it SEC centric though, because I have this one has kind of built up in my mind for a while. And I read something interesting the other day that basically laid out like whoever, the betting favorite is to win the Heisman at the beginning of the year, historically, they have an awful season and they don't even come close.
18 of the last 20.
Yeah.
Oh, no. 18 of the last 20 is the number one team not winning the national title.
Yeah.
That's what that was.
That's interesting too.
Yeah.
But anyway, my guy that I would be interested in seeing win the Heisman would be Jackson Dart.
Jackson Dart.
If Ole Miss ends up being good, I think he is pretty undervalued in the national landscape of quarterbacks because he's going into his third year as an SEC starter, and nobody else in the league can say that. He has to, at this point, seen some things that other guys haven't seen. So, and, if Ole Miss ends up being good, then, it's going to be chaos because other people are going to realize oh, okay, the pay for play model works. Now we're going to start doing this next year.
Yeah.
And, but their success is only going to, elevate his, national attention and Heisman chances.
And just going to throw this out there. He's got a great name for a Heisman winner. Jackson Dart. I mean, that's a good name to be on a Heisman trophy. That's just me, though. I don't know if everybody would agree with me, but I think you would, since that's your bold Heisman prediction there.
Well, and the other piece of this that's wild is 2 years ago when Jackson Dart left USC, OU was trying to bring him in to compete with Dillon.
And I believe they were trying to get him and Michael Trigg, I believe, yeah, right? With the tight end. Yeah, as a package deal.
Yes. Man, could you imagine Jackson Dart just having been sitting around being OU's backup the last 2 years instead of, being, getting all the reps he got at Ole Miss? His career is not the same.
No, absolutely not. Wild time. And both of those guys, Dillon Gabriel and Jackson Dart, both linked to OU a couple years ago when Brent Venables was coming here, and now not here, but still in the national narrative for Heisman Trophy race, and both on very good teams going into this year. Kind of wild and honestly crazy to think about.
Well, that's Tyler Shuck is going to be the starting quarterback at Louisville this year. Tyler Shuck was a senior 2 years ago when he and Texas Tech beat OU in the last
his 15th year of college, right?
Yeah. Well, and it's right up the road in Stillwater with Alan Bowman. Alan Bowman,
also former Texas Tech guy.
Yeah. Yeah. It's
wild stuff.
Weird world we live in.
Mason, I think we're going to end it there. We've gone an hour and 10 minutes. We could probably go another hour and 10 minutes knowing who we are. But I just thank you for coming on the show. We started talking OU football. We ended talking Texas Tech transfer quarterbacks that are in their 100th year of college football. You never know where the Ian Fritz Show is going to go. But I thank you so much for coming on, and I appreciate it. We're going to have to do it again sometime, probably very soon, because I really enjoyed this.
No doubt. It was a good time.
Thank you, Mason. All right, everybody. I love you guys. We'll see you in the next one. Bye.
Whoa, he has trouble with the snap, and the ball is free. It's picked up by Michigan State's Jalen Watts Jackson, and he scores on the last play of the game. 35, 40, 45, 50, 45. There goes Davis. Oh, my God. Davis is going to run it all the way back. Auburn's going to win the football game. Auburn's going to win the football game. He ran the missed field goal.